Why don't we go ahead and get into a comfortable posture? Just take a moment to settle in physically. Allow the body to be in a place where it doesn't really need to move for the next half hour or so. Well, that's different for different people, but it might involve like straightening the spine and lifting up through the crown of the head, maybe tilting the chin down a bit, pulling the shoulder blades back. Just whatever feels good for you. You might take a moment to notice what is present right now in experience. You can use words in your head if you like. You can just notice what's present. You don't need to label or categorize or understand. Just notice. And you might let attention rest on the breath, wherever it feels most prominent to you. And when the mind gets lost in thought, just remembering to be very gentle with yourself when you return. There's sometimes a tendency to beat yourself up or wish the mind was different than the way it was, or have negative thoughts about your practice, but there's really no need for any of that. The mind is doing what the mind is doing. So when you notice that you're lost in thought, the thing to do is just return to the breath with kindness. Maybe some gratitude that the mind woke up. That's it, nothing else. You might check in and see how much effort you're putting into this. You might check in and see if you're feeling a little tense or a little tight. Perhaps there's a feeling in your forehead or your cheeks. If so, that may be an indication that you may need to, or you may want to, just back off of the effort a bit and take a bit more of an attitude of relaxation, just receiving this breath coming in. Or you may find the mind feels a bit loose. It's kind of wandering all over the place, not very focused. In that case, you may want to dial up your intention a bit. Just put a little more effort into it. There's no real right or wrong answer. It's just doing what feels like it's helpful to you. So over the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to offer a few things that you might want to take a look at. And you can do that if it feels good to you and in whatever manner or fashion feels right to you. You can also continue on with the breath. That's very fine too. So one thing I might offer for you to try out is if the mind feels fairly stable right now, you might let go of the breath and simply be present. Presence is the natural state of the mind, and the mind is not being pulled around. It might stay there with some amount of stability. So you might just set the intention to be present and see how that goes. When some thought arises, it's threatening to suck the mind into it, you might simply let that go and remain present. So you might experiment with that as feels good to you. Another avenue of exploration that I might offer is you may consider bringing some curiosity to what's here in this present moment. So much of what we understand about the world is burdened by thought or belief that's not actually present, that's separate from the world here and now. And it's hard to untangle those. But if we bring some curiosity to it, we might discover some interesting things about the world. As one example, you might, in this moment, find the breath. If your mind kind of pointed to a certain area of experience or some group of sensations, you might wonder how it knew that. Is there a label that says a breath? They're just sensations. Where did that come from? How did the mind know? What's really present in this moment? And what's just your story of what you think the world is? So you can experiment with this as well. And I'll offer one more technique you might want to explore. If it feels good to you. You may sit here in presence and wait for a thought to arise. Most thoughts have some kind of hook to them, some kind of craving or aversion. What this is, or a way to understand this, is the part of you that's hurting. It's a part of you that has some kind of problem with the world and wants it to be other than the way it is. It may be a small hurt or it may be a big hurt, but it's a hurt. And an appropriate response to suffering is always kindness. So as a practice, you may wait for one of these thoughts to arise and just embrace it with kindness. Embrace that part of you that's suffering and make it welcome, and just give it a hug if um, that feels right to you. Just meet that with kindness. You don't need to engage in whatever story is kind of present with that thought. Just sort of short circuit that whole thing and just meet that hurt and embrace that hurt with kindness and compassion. You are welcome. It's okay that you are part of me. You may experiment with this as a practice. I think I'll remain silent for the remainder of the meditation and let you practice as feels good to you with any of those techniques or returning to the breath or some combination of those. Well, welcome, everyone. I think we have a few announcements today. So coming up in, I guess, a month and a half, on October 5th, there's the Autumn Gathering, which is the big yearly get-together for Dassanaya. And that'll be here at the Vihara. On October 7th, Dhammadippa is starting a 5-week online course on the introduction to Buddhism. So I think that will be all online. And on November 14th, there's going to be a residential retreat hosted by IMCW. I think it will be in this area. I'm not 100% sure, but that will start on November 14th. And all of that and some more things are listed on the website. You can take a look if you like. Oh, and the regular weekly schedules are back to their normal schedules now. I know there was a little bit of disruption while Dhammadippa was on retreat. So tonight I'd like to talk about what it means to be present. We spend so much of our time lost in the past or the future, moving from thought to thought to thought to thought. And what happens when we're doing that is when we're lost in thought, we're living in the world where that thought is true. And so what that does is that it shapes our perceptions of the phenomena that are arising and passing away. It casts them in a different light. And so we don't see the world clearly when we're doing that, when we're lost in thought. And so the opposite of that, being present, not being lost in thought, is being awake to the world, being aware of what's present, without that lens of thought or belief kind of coloring your perception. And the reason you might want to do this is that movement away from the world, kind of seeing it other than the way it is, that's where our suffering lies. And so tonight I want to offer just some thoughts about different ways you might think about approaching like presence in practice. So first you might understand presence as an instruction. This is often how it's given, the idea of, you should be present. And there's value to this, but it's often misunderstood. I think actually most people misunderstand this when they hear this. I know that I did. And the way it gets misunderstood is thinking that, okay, I should be present, so that means I should push away these thoughts that are kind of obscuring presence. And I think most people end up trying that and kind of eventually seeing that doesn't actually work. What you do when you push a thought away is you just give it more energy. You kind of give it a reason to come back. You make the wound that's causing the thought to come up, you make that, you're poking at it, you make it so it can't close. And so the way maybe to practice with presence is to kind of set the intention to be present, but know that you don't need thoughts to go away. It's enough to kind of take the energy out of them, to not feed them with your attention. So I guess the way to understand it is that, if there's a lamp over here, if I wanted that lamp to turn off, I wouldn't throw that lamp out the window. I would just kind of unplug the cord, just deprive it of energy. And after a while, it may start to die down. The really sticky thoughts may take longer, but in general, that's maybe a helpful posture. It's I guess I'm thinking of this in terms of a metaphor I use sometimes. It's like presence is like kind of being at the beach. There's this shore that's sometimes obscured by the waves. Just as the presence is sometimes seemingly obscured by thoughts that kind of come into the mind. But it always kind of comes out or goes out at some point, and presence shines through again. And when you take the attitude of like just having the intention to be present and not giving those thoughts attention, what happens is it's like the tide starting to go out. The waves start to recede, and the shore is exposed more and more often, and presence is kind of available more and more often to you. It's a much gentler way to be too. You can actually kind of get some concentration sometimes by like pushing away the thoughts, but it's only ever a temporary thing, and it makes them kind of come back stronger. And so maybe the difficult thing about being present this way, just setting the intention to be present, is like really kind of fully internalizing that it's really okay just to be. Like this body and this mind, they function on their own. You don't need to do anything with them. When you're out and about in the world, sometimes you do need to do things. If you get hungry, you need to eat, and if you're in the road, you need to like watch out for cars and stuff. But when you're sitting on the cushion, you don't need to do anything. And when you think of all the time we spent lost in thought in our practice, none of that actually needs to happen. It's okay just to be. It's okay to be like present with a mind that's angry, or present with a mind that's fearful or agitated or anxious, or any of those things. It doesn't mean you need to follow them, but that kind of energy or emotion or way you're showing up in the world is just fine. And it's a pretty radical thing in terms of the way that we normally live our life. So that's something to practice with. When you practice in this way, what might happen is that the mind inclines to stillness. And when you start to cultivate some of this stillness, when the thought energy becomes less and less, and gaps open up between the thoughts, and the gaps become more frequent and larger, what you might see is the stillness in between that is really quite nice. And when you see enough of that, you see that's actually the most preferable thing. When we get lost in thought, sometimes it's unpleasant, but sometimes it's very pleasant. Like I spent a great deal of my life daydreaming. Like I read a ton as a kid, and I had a very active imagination. That was my kind of escape valve, I guess, when life wasn't the way I wanted it. I would just go into these lovely worlds that I made. It was very pleasant. But even in the very pleasant thoughts, even when you're lost in those, there's still this quality of discomfort around being pulled around by your emotions. There's a sense in which it doesn't feel good. And when you start to cultivate this stillness and you compare the two things, the stillness is quite preferable. So the second thing I might talk about is coming at presence from a place of curiosity. So the first thing I mentioned was kind of coming at presence as a pragmatic thing, is something to do that's good for you, which it is. But you can also come at presence from this other angle, and it gives a really different flavor to your experience, and it fits better when you're like in a certain mood to do kind of one or the other, to kind of come from one angle or another. So what you can do in this is you can like really get curious about what's here. And to do this, you really want to use a different tool than the tool that we normally use for understanding the world, which is thought, or our intellect. Like it's very useful. Like it's thought is a wonderful tool, and it's so helpful to us, but it's much less helpful when you're trying to understand the true nature of reality, because when we think a lot, we often get lost in thought. And if we're lost in thought, that's obscuring what we're trying to see. So it's like, in one sense, if you have a searchlight is really good for looking at stuff. But if what you want to look at is, the stars in the night sky, and you point your searchlight at the stars, that's not going to help. It's just going to drown out what's there. So you need a different tool. And it turns out that we have another way of knowing the world besides thought and intellect. I understand it as like an intuitive knowing, and it's really like very simple, very basic feature of the mind. It's just like the mind seeing how the world works, and like this is the faculty of the mind that you can use for something like learning how to catch a ball. Like you don't need any thought whatsoever to learn how to catch a ball. You can do that completely without thoughts or words. It's just the mind's intuitive understanding of the world, how the world works from having observed it. And so you can use the same intuitive understanding with what's really present and learn about the world in that way without any thought, without any kind of obscuration of what's there. This is really helpful because so there's the world as it is, the phenomena that are arising and passing away, and there's the context around it, that in the set of beliefs and thoughts that we have to understand the world that shade our experience of it. And that set of contexts is quite tricky to look at directly because it's not actually present in reality. So it's kind of like looking at something in your peripheral vision. So you just kind of like point this intuitive knowing at what's present in the world, and it's able to just kind of pick that up, just see what's really there and what's kind of the story that you're telling. There's not anything you have to do with it, really. It's just being present will kind of naturally bring about that understanding. This is like really quite powerful. It can be, because it can really take you down through all of your beliefs and kind of deconstruct them all. And what's left when that, or maybe the felt sense of what happens when that occurs, is often some uncertainty, because it's really kind of destabilizing in terms of like changing your worldview. So it may be a little uncomfortable at first, but it's quite a good thing, because what happens is that is opening up your world. Like your world is constrained to what you believe, but if you break your beliefs, your worldview can open up, and what you are becomes something, or what you understand yourself to become something completely different. You see the truth of what this being is, really in a very different way. And so I'd also offer presence can be understood, like the act of coming to presence can be understood as giving a gift. The action of moving away from the world, of like moving out from craving or aversion into thought and kind of going off and getting lost, that's suffering. And the inverse of that, the coming into presence, that's healing and that's peace. So this action of coming to presence is a gift. It's a gift of healing to yourself. The kind of technique that I offered around this in the meditation was similar to one of my favorite guided meditations. I remember offering it a while ago. It's I think it's by a man named Thomas Metzinger, but it's you sit and come to presence and wait for a thought to come up, and you understand that thought as being a product of hurt, as I was mentioning in the meditation. And you understand that hurt, most of our hurts stem from childhood injuries, either directly or indirectly. So you understand that hurt as being carried by like a young child, like a young version of yourself. And so it's a kind of visualization practice. You sit and you have this line of children like waiting to come up to you to be cared for. They're hurt and they need to be cared for. And it can be a very powerful practice. That's one I've turned to when like stuff is kind of really torquing the mind around. You can just sit and you can do that for your whole meditation practice. So that's a gift. And one thing you start to see when you start to cultivate some of the stillness is, or this presence is what being present conditions. Um, so it conditions peace and wholeness and kindness and happiness. And so in the moment, that act of coming into presence, you can understand that as giving yourself more of that kindness and peace and happiness. And so practice is a gift in that sense. It's offered to yourself, but you know too that your emotional state and your way of seeing the world spreads out to others around you. And so when you sit and you come to presence, you can understand that as a gift to the people you meet in the future. So perhaps people you care about, or even just people in general. And this is really, so it's lovely to practice for yourself, but it's when you can find a way to practice for others, this can be just a completely wonderful way to practice. And it's so different. You know, I've like often had the experience of um, you know, having these very sticky thought patterns, and you know, they may be like a little bit delicious in a way. You know, there's some kind of like, you know, guilty pleasure associated with them, even if you don't know, even if you know that they're not good for you, there's still a kind of like wish to get lost in that. And if you're just practicing for yourself, it can be really easy to ignore the hurt that will come to you in the future from kind of getting lost in some of those thought patterns. But if you're practicing for somebody else and you know that in this moment when you have the choice to, you know, get lost in this pattern of thought and, you know, thereby encourage like anger or greed or whatever's going on in that thought pattern, you have that choice, or this choice of giving this gift of happiness or kindness to someone else. It becomes a very different thing. It's much harder to ignore. So it's a different motivation to practice. It's there's a sense in which it's a sacrifice. Like when you make that choice to not get lost in that thought, or to come back from that thought when you're lost in that, you are giving something up. You're giving up whatever you'd get out of getting lost in that thought. You know, maybe it's a pleasant thought and you're giving up that kind of pleasantness in the direct sense, or maybe it's not a pleasant thought, and what you're giving up is the safety of worry abouting a problem that that's kind of bothering you or something like that. But you're giving up whatever you would get out of that thought pattern for the sake of like offering this benefit of kindness to yourself and to others. So that really makes practice something very different. And to me, that's kind of at the heart of practice. Like practice is shedding this illusion of the sense of self and coming into communion with the whole. And that's what that is on a small scale. This choice that you have in the moment to, you know, either you know, get lost in thought, or to stay lost in thought, or to be present. That's what practice is about. It's just about coming back into this place of wholeness. Mm. I think that's what I have to offer today. It's very nice to see you all.